The Canola School on RealAgriculture.com is brought to you by BASF Canada and Invigor Hybrid Canola.
Hi, I'm Amber Bell, and this is Real Agriculture. I'm here today with Dr. Ken Fry, who is an entomologist with Olds College, and we're here to bring you a canola school talking about sweep netting techniques in canola. So welcome, it's great to have you.
Well, it's my pleasure to be here, so thank you very much for the invitation.
Yeah, so we're going to be talking about sweep netting techniques. I think everybody knows what a sweep net is, but I think that there's more to it than just going out and dusting the crop, right?
Absolutely. So the reason we use a sweep net is it's very versatile. It's a simple technology. It's easy to make or purchase. They're inexpensive to purchase. The sampling method that we use, where we're sweeping through the crop or into the crop itself, it's been proven through a lot of research to be able to take a representative sample of what's out there in the crop. You can exploit how the insect behaves. So as we're going through the crop, it depends. If you're going for, say, foliage feeding insects, you would sweep down into the canopy and get that foliage sampled. If you're going after something more that attacks the flowering stage, then you're coming at the flowering stage. But either way, you leave a little bit of head space because some insects, they'll drop. So you need to get deep enough down through the crop to capture the animals you're after. But one of the behavioral quirks of some species is they see something coming or a disturbance, they leap up into the air. So that's why you have a little bit of head space above the canopy, so that if they have that kind of a response, you capture them.
Right.
So the technique it is, ultimately it's been shown to be reliable, to be representative of what's in the field. But in order to get it done well so that your numbers are correct, and so why do we need numbers? We don't just go, it's Tuesday, let's spray. It's based on integrated pest management principles, specifically economic thresholds.
Right.
When is it worthwhile to expend the cost on equipment, labor, and material to go out and spray a field, in addition to accepting what are the non-target costs, right? And we can talk about that in a moment. But strictly speaking, if you're going to take an action, it should be driven by the circumstances in the field. Like, what is the risk? Absolutely. So we have these economic thresholds. So X number of animals per square meter, per plant, per 10 sweeps, whatever it is, per pheromone trap. And so that's why we're going to go out and sweep, is we're going to see if we can detect what's out there and then compare it to what level is actually worth taking action, or saying, no, our field is not infested enough, it's not worth our while to expend this much money to protect that much loss of crop.
Right. And so when you're going out and sweeping, so how many, let's say, swipes are you taking per area of field? What are we looking for?
So this is where it gets really challenging. There's a formula called Cochrane's formula, and what it does is some of those people who have read what is it? Forget it was. It's an old science fiction book. The names escape me. But anyway, the answer to the life, the universe is everything is 42, but that's not it. It's 386.
That's a lot more than 42.
Yes.
Yeah.
And so what the formula breaks down to is if you have like 10,000 units or more, so 10,000 plants, 10,000 square meters, 10,000 whatever, in order to get a statistically relevant and reliable sample, you would have to take 386 samples.
Okay.
And so it's a proportion of that large population. So if you had a very small population, say you had 100 plants or 100 square meters, you'd actually have to sample 80% of those, or 80 of those plants, or 80 of those square meters. But as your population goes higher, that proportion drops down. So there is no one true answer. It's based on what area are you sampling. If you're sampling 100 acres, you'd have to sample presumably 80% of those acres, but that's prohibitive. Nobody's going to go out and sample 80 acres
80%
of a quarter section, right?
Right.
That's ridiculous. So strictly speaking, industry has looked at sampling over time, and a good general rule would be 100 acres, you're going to take 10 to 20 samples. Anything over 100 acres, you're taking 20 to 50 samples.
Okay.
Now these samples, when we say a sample, that's 10 sweeps. And so, because if you just took one sweep, who knows? It could be in a low dip, it could be at a high spot,
Right.
it could be at some underperforming plants, it could be at some overperforming plants. That's what we mean by the variability of a population. Every plant here is different. And every disease pressure, every insect pressure is different for every plant.
Right, and elevation probably changes it a
Oh,
bit
wind
due to
direction,
moisture.
oh,
and-
relative humidity, temperature, all manner of things. Soil, like you know how variable soil is, right?
Yeah.
So if you're taking your 10 sweeps, then it's sort of, okay, I'm going to pool all of that variability and get an average. So then I count, I've got so many ligas per 10 sweeps. I have so many cabbage seed pod weevil. Then I go another sample site. So what we like to do is, if you're doing something like cabbage seed pod weevil, we call this directed systematic sampling, because we're directing our sampling, our system,
towards catching those.
it's exploiting the biology. So the biology, the behavior, like cabbage seed pod weevil coming in from the edges, or flea beetles coming in from the edges, grasshoppers coming in from the edges. Then we would focus our system towards the edges first.
Okay.
But if it's something that is, landing on the high spots, like cutworms and wheat, ligas coming in from other places, then you would do a W. So essentially a W, and we're getting edge of the field, we're getting middle of the field, we're getting a representative sample of the field. Now it means a lot of walking.
Yeah.
And just a helpful tip, you park your vehicle at one side of the field, start out that you end up on that same road.
So you don't have to walk quite so far.
So we don't do Z sampling where you end up somewhere else. It's a W sample.
Right.
And so what you do is, the other thing is why we call it systematic, is humans are inherently biased. Ooh, look. Like we'll overestimate
Looking
the
for
threat.
grasshoppers. Hey, there's
Yeah,
one over there.
exactly, or
Let's go there.
disease or whatever. So we'll overestimate, or I do not want to spend the money, I don't want to put the spray suit on or whatever, and they say, I see nothing, and then you underestimate. So that human bias can be a problem. And what we'd rather do is be systematic, take as much of the subjectivity out of it, and so we walk that line and go 5 meters, and then we take our 10 sweeps. So 1 meter, 1 sweep every meter as we walk through the crop. Take our 10, pop that in a container, and then we go walk 5 meters, take our 10. So you have to map out your field first, so drone footage or Google Earth or satellite footage is nice, so that you can pre-select where you're going to do your walk. And that
And then
takes,
your bias doesn't.
yeah, your
hit
bias
that,
doesn't creep
right?
into it. Absolutely. And that means it's objective. It means that the numbers that you're taking from your efforts are likely to be valid and will best represent realistically what's in your field, and then you make better informed decisions.
Right. So you spoke about sweeping for just one species. Would there be a reason, or would you do a general sweep over the entire field just to kind of see what's out there as a whole?
If you're a masochist.
Oh, okay.
Yeah. So let's be honest. Producers are very busy individuals. There's some downtimes, certainly, but strictly speaking, as the crop's growing, they have to make a lot of decisions. When we say do a general sweep, don't bother.
Right.
The reason being is there are different pests at different crop times. So cabbage seed pod weevil is getting into the seed pods. That's much later than ligas on the flower buds,
Right.
which is a different time from some of the foliar pests, or taking up plants and looking for root maggot, or looking at the cotyledons for flea beetles. So, diamondback moth, pretty much as soon as it starts in the spring, if they come up with the storms, right? And then you're going through and seeing, is the population increasing over time? So we have pheromone traps, strictly speaking, for berthas and diamondback, but you also sweep for diamondback, or you yoik out plants and whap them over the hood of your vehicle, because what is the threshold? 200 larvae per square meter?
Right.
Who's going to count 200 larvae? You should, but but it's a guesstimate. It's kind of an eyeballing thing. But strictly speaking, you're sweeping when the target pest and
Is the
the
most
plant is
active.
at the right stage. So you might end up sweeping multiple times in a season. Now, that goes for the beneficial insects too. They have a cycle to them as well. Like there are certain animals will be out early season, some mid-season, some late season. So to do just a one single snapshot is unlikely to give you the kind of information you need to make informed decisions.
Okay, that's really good to know. And then are there any resources on where producers can, because you mentioned sweeping at different heights, in the crop. Are there any resources where producers could go to figure out, okay, you know what, I'm looking for, you know, cutworms or something, where am I sweeping in?
So the Canola Council of Canada is really good that way. They have Canola Encyclopedia online. They have videos on how to sweep. They have videos on where to sweep. They have information pamphlets on who's a good animal, who's a bad animal, so the beneficials versus the pests, pest timing. So they'll have a life cycle, and they'll have a calendar and the bars across which months that any given life stage will be present and when you're supposed to be doing your sampling. So they have done a really good job amassing all that information from all the research that they fund.
Yeah.
They fund an awful lot of research, and that's, of course, the growers themselves, the producers themselves are actually funding it through a checkoff system. And so, to reward them for that dedication, here's all the information you need to make good decisions.
Very cool.
Yep.
Very cool. So do you have any other final closing thoughts on sweep netting techniques, on what producers should be out there doing, looking for, especially as we're reaching the flowering stage here?
Sure, and we touched on this at the very beginning, and that is precision. And so Amber goes out and sweeps, and Ken goes out and sweeps. Are their numbers really comparable? Is that an Amber number? Is that a Ken number? How do we make sense of this? So if you have more than one person doing this field scouting for you, you have to have that precision. So when we do a sweep, it is at the right canopy height. So one person might be taller than the other. So you can't just say at your hip, do a hip pivot.
Right.
You have to no, it's at this level of the canopy depending on which animal we're going for. Number two is I'm going to back up here just a bit, and it's a 180 degree. So we do 180 degrees, and that way you're sampling the same area I'm sampling.
Right.
Right, so that Amber sweep and Ken sweep, we can combine those numbers and they're an accurate reflection of what's out there. So that's precision, doing it the same way every time. And that means it's reliable. You don't have strange numbers creeping up from, why is it that way? And that's something else to think about is the weather. When you go out, is it particularly windy? Are the insects going to be hunkered down, and so you're undersampling them? Is it really wet? Because in the first field you go to, it was really early in the morning, there's a lot of dew, and so those things are gumming up your net, you're not seeing as much as you'd want, and then by the time you get to your last field, it's late afternoon. So you're going to have these time differences as well.
Right.
So you try to, as much as possible, say, okay, this is what, and this is only through experience. You're going to have to look at your fields and get to know them, and that, okay, this morning number is equivalent to this afternoon number, or this windy number is equivalent to this rainy or wet number. So then it's not just a single number.
Right.
It's going to have to be context specific. So
throughout the season, you'd really want to be keeping good records.
Yes.
And knowing what happened, a month, 2 months ago.
Yes, and even on the very day that you were sampling, is take those records down. And it was an American philosopher, George Santayana, not to be confused with Carlos Santana, the guitarist, but George Santayana, those who ignore history are doomed to repeat it.
Right.
Right? So keeping good records, you learn from the past, you are then prepared. That's what differentiates us from a rutabaga. We can predict the future, right? Rutabagas, not so much.
I'm glad that we're different from a rutabaga.
Not that I have anything against rutabagas, they're delicious. But essentially is, if we can plan, if we can project, if we can do this predictive modeling, and that's essentially what an economic threshold is sort of about, is we're taking a snapshot of what's out there with the prediction that this is going to get worse, and so we need to take action. And that way we're doing preemptive actions, preventative sprays, not in the sense that I'm just going to spray just because it's Tuesday, but in the sense that I'm going to prevent this population from getting to a damaging state.
Right.
Where I'm actually, even if I do spray, I lose yield and I lose money, and that's of course an economic injury level. We never want to reach that level where in spite of our actions we're still losing. So in that regard, doing it well, doing it objectively, doing it with precision, doing it at the right time for the right animal. If you do it well, good results in, good results out. Right? If you're just taking shortcuts, garbage in, garbage out, you won't have the information to make good risk management decisions.
Well, that's amazing. Thank you so much for the information today. And that was Dr. Ken Fry on Real Agriculture.